Today, we heard how couples are 5 times more likely to break up in the days before Valentine's Day. Awful for them, awful for their loved ones. In Barrie, 3-year-olds Bob and Bud will now be living in separate homes after their parents split up. A Superior Court judge made the decision after a, quote, tumultuous relationship deteriorated and ended up in accusations and a court case. There will be no shared custody, no rules about visitation. Bob and Bud are dogs. Each partner will get one of them. Is this a good idea? How often are pets the source of custody disputes? Laura Paris is a divorce lawyer with experience with cases involving pets, and she joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
So how unusual is it to hear about a case that ends up in court?
You know what? It is quite unusual for it to make it all the way to court. When it comes to something like pet custody, or anything involving a pet, when you do separate, when you are making the decision to go ahead to go to court, we always tell clients to weigh kind of a cost benefit analysis. And when you look at the cost to proceed to court and go to trial on an issue involving a pet, usually the cost doesn't really justify the end.
So even though pets can feel like children, what are the rules? I mean, how different are they from disputes involving children?
So it's actually entirely different, and to be honest, as a pet owner myself, I don't know how much I stand behind this, but way they look at the way that the court looks at pets is as they're treated as property. So when you're looking at who ends up with a pet at the end of, or in the event of a breakdown of a marriage or a common law relationship, you're actually looking at who purchased the pet. That's step one in determining ownership at the end of a relationship, and that's really all that's determined. You're not talking about a visitation schedule. You're not talking about any sort of support for the dog. While, of course, you can agree to those things amongst yourself, when it comes to the court, the only thing the court's going to make an order on or a decision on is who owns the dog.
Because they are property. So, oh my goodness, even though you shared ownership, it's whoever's got the receipt for the dog that owns the dog?
Basically, yeah. It's actually interesting. There was a case, and again, you don't see a lot of reported cases on this, just because it's not that often that it makes it all the way to court. A case recently in January 2020, it was released. Essentially what happened was there was one person who purchased the dog, and everybody acknowledged that the dog was purchased by the one individual. Now the other party claimed that it was a gift. So yes, it was purchased by the other person, but they were saying that it was a gift to them, so that they were the rightful owner. What the court essentially did was said, the only evidence I have before me is that one person purchased a dog, which everybody agrees to, and that the dog was living in that person's home. And for that reason, we believe that the rightful owner is the person that purchased it, and that was the end of the inquiry there.
Wow. Okay, so what about when you have these negotiations? They don't go into court, but say, everybody gets together and discusses this. Is there a way then to get joint custody?
You absolutely can, and this is the beauty of entering into some sort of domestic contract, where you can essentially decide how you want your separation to go, and this can absolutely include some sort of provisions relating to a pet. You see circumstances where people do have dogs going back and forth just like children. In fact, in situations where there are children involved, sometimes you have the dog that's actually going back and forth with the kids. So if it's a week on, week off sort of situation, the dog is moving every other week with the children. You also see circumstances where people will decide to set up almost like a trust for the dog, where they just have a joint account that they both deposit equal sums into, so that when it comes to food, vet bills, things like that, there's a common fund that they're taking that from. So you're not arguing over who should be paying for this, who should be paying for that.
Interesting. It reminds me, in the U.S. last year, actress Mandy Moore made headlines because she battled her ex over custody, but then also wanted pet support. So that's not unheard of then.
It's not unheard of. The only thing is that the court doesn't want to dive into that. And the reason being is that you're opening a floodgate if you go there. I mean, to elevate, and again, as a pet owner, while I do appreciate that a dog is much more, or a dog or a cat or whatever you're talking about, is much more than just an object. It's not an inanimate object. It's not just property. To level it back to or make it equal or akin to a child, that's opening a very large floodgate, because you are talking about something like, should support be payable? How are we determining support? What is in the, when you're thinking about custody and access when it relates to the kid, you're talking about what is the best in the best interest of the child. So are we going to ask the court to engage in a decision as to what's in the best interest of the dog? How do we even go there?
Yeah.
So it's really, you have to, when you look at it in that sense, you have to look at, even is it the best use of court resources to have our judicial system start to look into the custody and support of a dog.
So then it could happen then that pets get split up because, the bottom line is that the pet's best interests are not a factor.
Absolutely, and that's what and it's not a factor. It's really not considered. And this recent case that I spoke of, while it does absolutely acknowledge that pets they're not just property. They are more important to people than just property. Again, it's a matter of saying to spend court resources diving into these disputes is not what we want to do.
Have you ever had experience with a couple who got really nasty because of a pet?
I have not personally, while I have heard of them, and again, you do see them come up here and there. There was a situation, I would say in the 90s, where there was a court who did decide something that was similar to a kind of custody schedule or an access schedule, but later cases said, like, we shouldn't be doing this. And this isn't what the court is here to do. We deal with child-related issues, but when it comes to something like a pet, that's not what we should be doing. So even for me, if I have a client come in and say, this is something I'm very serious about, this is something I want to move forward with, while absolutely I can validate how they feel, when it comes to pursuing something through the court or going that far with it, I'm very discouraging of it, just because I know that it's not an issue that the courts want to deal with, and really it could be something that you get a slap on the wrist for, to say, why are you wasting your resources on this? Find a way to work it out.
Yeah.
So really, when you have someone come in, my main goal when I hear that issue is, how do we find a happy medium here, and where's the solution? Because that's the cheapest way you're going to deal with it.
Laura, thanks very much for sharing perspective with us.
Thank you.
That's Laura Paris, a divorce lawyer. Well, pets can not only become a major point of contention in our relationships, they can often feel the heartache as well. Our furry friends also form deep connections with their owners. According to a new survey from Rover.com, the bond between humans and animals can provide plenty of benefits for both. To give us her insights, we've got Rebecca Greenstein on the line. She is the veterinary medical advisor for Rover.com. Good morning.
Good morning.
So when couples separate, what kind of impact could it have on their pets?
Pets are so deeply connected to us, the same way that we're connected to them. And I've seen several clients of mine over the years their pets have undergone tremendous anxiety from sort of being moved from house to house, sometimes being with the children, sometimes not being with the children. The more we bond with our pets and consider them part of family, it should come as no surprise that they start to come up as an issue when couples split.
How could it manifest itself? What behavior would you notice?
So dogs really crave, not too dissimilar to us, they crave a certain amount of environmental and emotional stability. So if they're moving environments or spending time in unfamiliar environments, you can start seeing certain anxious behaviors manifest. For example, they're barking a lot, don't want to be left alone. They're peeing or pooping in the house inappropriately when they didn't do that before. They're showing destructive behaviors. Those types of things are sort of signs that something is off with them.
So it's interesting, isn't it? One of my colleagues, when I was telling her about this story, said that when she split with her ex, they each took one dog. And then her dog, which had never behaved this way, started to become very aggressive and barking and even attacking people. Would that be because of some sort of trauma?
So, well, the question is, I think earlier we were talking about what's in the best interest of the dog. So obviously everyone wants to split time and split custody, but we also have to remember that dogs bond very strongly with each other. So oftentimes it's not a good idea to split one with one and one with the other because they're pack animals and they have a hierarchy and a language between themselves. So let's say they're used to coexisting. You take one of the dogs away and now you have a complete disruption. Someone who was passive may become more dominant. Someone who was dominant may become more passive. They have less company. They can't keep each other company. So there's a dynamic between the dogs that we ought to acknowledge and respect.
So it is interesting. So even maybe before we get in relationships, I wonder if our pets are so important to us, is it important for us to know how the other feels about them?
Oh, absolutely. And even point back to the Rover survey that says that almost all of the people, so over 87% of dog people in a relationship think that having a dog makes them feel more like a family. Obviously people love dogs, but there's something about getting a dog if you're in a couple that makes it feel cemented. But remember, getting a dog, not an object, not just property, that if you're trying out a relationship, as much as a dog can add to the sense of family, if your relationship doesn't have that stability, now you're just dragging another life into something that could be quite chaotic.
Interesting. And is there something to being a dog person versus a cat person? And does that have an impact when you're searching for a partner?
Oh, this is an excellent question. And a lot of research has been done trying to find some correlation between what are the qualities that cat owners seem to possess versus dog owners, what would lead someone to get a cat versus a dog. There needs to be more research on specifically what does that translate into in terms of relationships. But there have been recent studies. Cat owners will go crazy with this. It's not an insult in any way, where sometimes cat owners are a little bit higher on certain neuroses scales. This is just a handful of studies, so please no one take this personally. How that may or may not impact into relationships is certainly something that needs to be explored. But again, no offense meant to cat people. I'm a veterinarian. I wouldn't mean none.
You love all animals.
I love all equally. Exactly. It does not on anyone on the neurosis scale.
Rebecca, thank you very much for sharing your view with us this morning.
You're so welcome.
Rebecca Greenstein, veterinary medical advisor for Rover.com. What do you think? Are pets a deal breaker for you when it comes to relationships? Let me know.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts/podcasts/podcasts/podcasts/podcasts/podcasts/podcasts